All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Dorman. I serve as the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the library today, whether you're here in the room or participating via Zoom. The event will be about an hour, and there'll be an opportunity for audience members, both in person and virtually, to ask questions. We have someone on the live stream monitoring the Q&A function for questions for our presenters. And for those of you who are in person, we ask that you simply raise your hand so that we can bring you the microphone. Just a few housekeeping notes that I'd like to mention. This room is T-coil enabled. So if you have a T-coil enabled device, please feel welcome to switch that on at this time. And we also ask for that reason that everybody who's speaking, whether you're asking a question or you're a presenter, that you use the microphone so that everybody can hear. Please join me in welcoming the director of Princeton University Press, Christy, who will introduce this morning's program.
Morning. Thank you, Kim. It is such a grateful and sunny day to be here with you on a Sunday in a house of books, worshiping of a sort, and worshiping in the company of people of the book, and especially to be in a house of books as warm and inclusive and energizing as the Princeton Public Library. And I want to give a special shout out to the library for all of the programming they've done these last 2 years to sustain us through really harrowing times. I also could not be more excited to spend a morning learning about how books and houses that collect them build community, and how they're able to do so because of the absolutely extraordinary people who create the collections and ignite the conversations and generate the truly transformative experience that is awaiting all of us as we enter and journey within bookstores, libraries, and other book collections. It's my pleasure to introduce several community builders and people of the book. They are individually and collectively an inspiration, which I know you will all experience in this next hour if you haven't done so already. Dorothea von Moltke and Cliff Sims, together with Cliff's brother Peter Sims, co-own Labyrinth Books. We're very lucky to have them as neighbors in Princeton, and the wholesale book remainder company Great Jones Books in Pennington. Eric Maywar is owner of Classics Books in Trenton and serves as a City of Trenton Economic Development Specialist. Classics Books is, quote, a community hub, a supporter of all things Trenton, a supporter of kids who want to read, independent authors, knitters, Scrabble players, poets, and book lovers of all stripes, which we hope you all are. Jeff Deutsch is the director of Seminary Co-op Bookstores, the first not-for-profit bookstore whose mission is bookselling. Jeff has been a bookseller since 1994. Prior to joining the Seminary Co-op in 2014, Jeff's appointments included the directorships of both Stanford University Bookstore and the UC Berkeley Bookstore. Jeff serves on multiple industry boards, including the New Press and the American Booksellers Association, and I am particularly grateful to note that he's the first bookseller to join the board of Princeton University Press as a trustee. And that same press has also just published his book, In Praise of Good Bookstores, and we are here in praise of all of that today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you to everyone for joining this morning in a wonderful, wonderful house of books. The book is In Praise of Good Bookstores, and it's specifically about bookstores, certainly, but it also is about what it feels like, what it means, and the nourishment provided by the presence of books and being in spaces of books. So I'm going to just read a little bit from the book, a couple of excerpts before we turn over to Cliff to moderate a conversation with my people, the booksellers, and those who keep these houses of books. So, what a strange thing, the bookshop. There are just so many books. In 2019, there were 20 million published books available, not counting books published that year. Every book requires considerable attention to write, publish, sell, and read. Books serve such diverse purposes and are written for so few readers at a given time. As such, efficiencies common to other industries are impossible in the book industry. The remarkable and perhaps unique thing about the Good Bookstore is that it has never counted on the blockbuster, or what Edward Shills describes as overstuffed political books and puffy and pallid biographies, to thrive, but on thousands and thousands of singular products that must be patiently left on the shelf, rendering capital inert, as it were, until their destined reader discovers them. John Ruskin, the 19th century art critic and armchair political economist, in his 1891 lecture Sesame and Lilies, writes of books of the hour and books of all time, noting, of course, that this isn't a distinction of quality. There are, after all, good and bad books of the hour and good and bad books of all time, but of species. If the conventional wisdom is to be believed, there are books of the hour that one must read in order to participate in the cultural conversation, and books of all time that everyone is meant to have read. This is not the case, of course, and that is one of the great virtues of the book trade and the reading public. Surely there are books of either category that enough people have read that it seems like everyone is reading them or has already read them, but we booksellers know that the conventional wisdom is false and has little bearing on the work of bookselling. The bookstore is a haven for the heterodox. The Good Bookstores collection comprises books that might have been published a month ago, a year ago, a half century ago, a couple of millennia ago. The attuned bookseller must provide a selection of books of all vintages. To do so, the work of bookselling demands a firm grasp, not just of the literature of the ages, but also of the literature of one's lifetime and the thousands of new publications announced in the publishers' catalogs that arrive seasonally and by the dozens. Only a minute fraction of the books one considers will make the shelves. Discernment is the primary quality of the good bookseller. Filtration, selection, assemblage, and enthusiasm, their work. As a business proposition, this model is clearly untenable. No retailer whose work is to buy cheap and sell dear would develop the business of the bookstore. The newspaperman H.L. Mencken, speaking to the same point in his 1930 essay, Lo, the Poor Bookseller, writes, quote, "The marvel is indeed that the bookseller ever survives at all. It is as if a haberdasher, in addition to meeting all the hazards of the current fashion, had to keep in stock a specimen of every kind of shirt, collar, sock, necktie, and undershirt in favor since 1750. 90-odd years later, our conundrum hasn't changed, even if the books and authors have. Our customers might find our stock insufficient if we don't offer the latest Ta-Nehisi Coates or Elena Ferrante, while another less contemporary reader might be disappointed by not finding 25-year-old volumes by Bell Hooks or Elizabeth Hartwick. And that same bookseller must know which Coates and which Ferrante, if any, to keep on the shelf and which, if any, to let go a decade from now. On these points, the novelist and enthusiast on behalf of bookstores, Christopher Morley, writing at the same time as Mencken, understood our challenge well. The bookseller, he writes, has to combine the functions of the barroom and the bodega. He must be able to serve on demand not only the cocktail of the moment, but also the scarcest of old vintages. How rare is the publican who understands the merits of both? It's clear that the business of bookselling is secondary for most booksellers, which is why they find creative ways to make profits elsewhere, that they might continue to sell the sort of books that drew them to the work in the first place. Most of them, too, would expect to see the likes of Coates, Ferrante, Hooks, and Hardwick on the shelves of any good bookstore. In our time, bookstores have taken to selling everything from socks to coffee, just as booksellers in Edward Shills' time took to dealing in pen wipers, blotters, writing pads, and greeting cards or gramophone discs. And of course, we understand why. They need the margin. I've been a bookseller since 1994, and throughout my career, I've operated these sorts of stores. The pull of the presence of books is so strong that I have, without pride but without shame, supplemented the book collection with notebooks, coffee, greeting cards, and other sidelines, thinking it a reasonable compromise to maintain a decent bookstore, and it is. Even decent bookstores, I would argue, are tremendously important to a thriving community, but they aren't representative of our highest aspirations. Neither, of course, is the largest and most mercenary seller of books in the world, Amazon. In fact, the work of bookselling is completely circumvented. This 21st century model of selling books is an everything store that does away with filtration, selection, assemblage, and enthusiasm entirely. Jeff Bezos, in a talk delivered to the Special Libraries Conference in 1997, explained that he chose books as the first product his new company would sell because, quote, there are more items in the book category than there are items in any other category by far. In addition, the relatively uniform size made them easy to package and ship. That Bezos then turned books into loss leaders, i.e. products sold at a loss in order to attract customers who will then purchase higher margin products, thus creating profitable transactions. That Bezos then turned books into loss leaders is particularly unsavory, considering that professional booksellers have long placed a higher value on their cultural work than on the tremendous effort required to achieve even thin margins selling books. They needed to sell socks in order to make bookselling profitable. Bezos chose to devalue books in order to make already profitable merchandise like socks even more profitable. If we no longer need bookstores to buy books, why then do we still need bookstores? And what in the 21st century makes a good bookshop? Whatever answer we provide must begin with the presence of books and the impulse to browse those books. The best argument on behalf of bookstores is the bookstores themselves, carefully built by booksellers who, like my predecessors, created an improbable place whose sheer existence provided a value to their bookish communities that far exceeded their financial dividends. Join me as we make our way through the bookstore. I will use the bookstore itself to make a case that a good bookshop, as Edward Shills wrote, is a, quote, necessary part of the habitat of a lively intelligence in touch with the world. We will wander the stacks, pull a volume from the shelves, consider a thought or two, delight in a particularly felicitous observation, daydream a bit, and hope to circumscribe the problem that we might tighten the circumference around the solution. As Walt Whitman says, eye and mind do not convince by arguments, similes, rhymes, we convince by our presence. So it might be with books, so it might be with bookstores. This book is not a lamentation, we have enough of those, but a celebration and perhaps incidentally a justification of the good bookstore. To borrow from Borges, I submit these thoughts that we might let our enormous bookstore be justified. I'm going to read one more brief passage that speaks to the browse. There is something of the prospector about the reader lost among books as there is about the reader lost in a book. John Ruskin, speaking of the way of the world, reminds us that writers, scattering bits of wisdom throughout their pages, are just following the method of nature. He describes a phenomenon readers know well, that there is a reticence in the wise whereby one only receives their wisdom as a reward for effort set forth. Likening wisdom to gold, which Ruskin calls the physical type of wisdom, he sees no reason why the electric forces of the earth don't consolidate gold to an easily accessible spot from which we might fashion our currency. Quote, but nature does not manage it so, he writes. She puts it in little fissures in the earth. Nobody knows where. You may dig long and find none. You must dig painfully to find any. And so it is for the accomplished browser when confronted by a good bookstore. They seek the reward. They hope they are worthy. And they've developed a unique strategy for surveying the crags and fissures as Ruskin would have it. When we come to a book, he tells us, we must ask ourselves, are my pickaxes and shovels in good order? And am I in good trim myself, my sleeves well up to the elbow, and my breath good, and my temper? And so it must be for the browser approaching the bookstore, preparing to excavate the gold they seek. Gold seekers, Heraclitus says, dig much earth to find a little gold. But here, as in any work worth doing, the effort is also its own reward. Horace Walpole, the English politician and writer, in the first known usage of the word serendipity, refers to it as accidental sagacity, by which he means that no discovery of a thing you are looking for comes under this description. The scholar Sean Silver describing serendipity as the discovery of something useful while on the hunt for something else, has explored the centuries-old appeal of the idea, which clearly predates Walpole's coinage. If only it could be systematized, Silver imagines the argument unfolding, induced, lured out of hiding, or otherwise prompted, if the conditions for it could only be prepared, or the mindset conducive to encountering it could be learned, well, the potential payoffs are immediately obvious. Ruskin might have replied, but nature does not manage it so. Perhaps serendipity is not quite as accidental as Walpole made it out to be. In his masterpiece, The Man Without Qualities, the novelist Robert Musil thinks deeply about how to pursue certainty in an uncertain world, struggling to achieve a literary representation of a man thinking. Musil writes, when someone asked a great scientist how he managed to come up with so much that was new, he replied, because I never stopped thinking about it. And it is surely safe to say that unexpected insights turn up for no other reason than that they are expected. In other words, seemingly accidental phenomena are often quite deliberate. The wise readers have a talent for finding the right book at the right time. They're masterful prospectors and know that wisdom rarely bestows unearned rewards. On some level, discoveries occur because we are searching. It's that simple. If serendipity is the discovery of something useful on the hunt for something else, the expert browser doesn't even bother with the conceit that there need to be a something else for which to hunt. There's a taxonomy of browsers in the book, and so I'm going to speak to idlers and flaneurs. They're all different types of browsers, so those are the references here. To the idler as to the flaneur, the stroll is an end in itself. There is a curiosity about what might come next, a receptivity to whatever might arise, and a conviction that whatever it is, it will be of interest. The idler gazes upon the physiognomy of the stacks and needs no further stimulation to pass the hours in pleasant reverie. The pilgrim restlessly seeks what they do not know. Again, there can be something of the quest in the reader finding their way among books. There is an urgency in the search, and a sense, a conviction perhaps, that around the corner, the next nook will be the book that will arise to meet this moment. For now, that bookish prospector passes the hour in deep attention. In most of these cases, the work of the bookseller, creating just the right conditions, is silent. There's a certain style of bookselling that prides itself on its invisibility. Thank you, and I turn it over to Cliff to move into the...
Hi, thank you for coming out today. I am one of the owners of Labyrinth and have spent my adult life in bookstores. What I wanted to do, very, very briefly, was just first appreciate Jeff's book and situate Seminary in this moment. And I do want to say it is a wonderful book. It is reverential and inspiring and shows a devotion to the future of bookstores, which I think is important. My first impressions of Seminary Co-op come from, I think, 1990, when I was at a book fair. Sponsored by Powell's, also a wonderful used bookstore in the vicinity. And I remember that visit because Seminary was already legendary. And I remember clearly that the emotions stirred up in that immediate impression were just reconfirmed 100 times over in every other visit. And I will tell you that there was an ambivalence in walking into that store. I had admiration and awe for a scholarly collection that was unsurpassed in the United States at that time, and intense envy, really, that I never get over, for a kind of, how can you do this today kind of feeling. But, what I recognized as both unattainable was as yet the model that I had always internalized and would continue to. One, how could you do that today? And how is it really possible to sustain something like that? It has been that receding image that we have been chasing variously for 30 years. I do want to say that a couple days ago, like Christy, I returned from the London Book Fair after selling books for 5 days to bookstores. Part of Labyrinth's secret sauce is that we recognized 25 years ago that it would be impossible to keep that kind of collection the Seminary had by asking publishers to sell you new books at their prices and wanting to be paid in 60 days for those new books. So we founded basically a remainder book company, Great Jones Books, which buys publishers' overstocks, remainders, publishers' returns, and everything at alternate prices on the market. And we started out as a scholarly book remainder company, but that became increasingly meaningless to all of our customers. So we just became a book remainder company. But I do want to say that in 5 days, we sold books to many wonderful bookstores. The Dillons on Gower Street, Blackwell's in Oxford, both now part of Waterstones. The Layla from Porto, which if you don't know, is probably the most beautiful bookstore in the whole world. And a number of notable bookstores in Calcutta, Mumbai, Istanbul, Malaysia, Paragon, especially in art books in Beijing, Book City in Iran. There are really many, many good bookstores. And in reading Jeff's book, You will, I hope, find out that despite their overt differences in size and collection and geography, they do share certain qualities, which Jeff elaborates very thoughtfully. They share a reverence for books because they know and believe in what reading books at its best fosters. Opening the life of possibility, critical self-reflection, tolerance for not being at home, and as Emerson explained, a losing of oneself. That's the only means of finding. Good bookstores like Seminary Co-op organize themselves to be self-conscious handmaids that try to amplify these effects as experiences for our customers, which helps make the stores vital to diverse readers and communities. The devaluation of books in bookstores, which Jeff spells out endlessly. And I think it's important to understand that, in a way, it has been over a century, right? So the praises of bookstores and the lamentations go hand in hand. They're cousins to each other, and they always have been. From their founding, bookstores were endangered species. Books were ephemeral, and bookstores were always these halfway house solutions between cultural institutions and economic enterprises. The devaluation of books in bookstores, which Jeff spells out, the reduction of so many values to the stripped bare price, to the nexus of cost-benefit, is a dilemma being faced today by almost all cultural institutions, though. Not only bookstores, all the arts, and all socially engaged small businesses. This offers both a crisis, but an opportunity. There is a tremendous potential solidarity in communities between all of the institutions that are under the same constraints and bearing up under the same contradictions. If only we can understand them together and form a new model. Jeff outlines the situation and demands a new model to cope with it. I think that is, in some ways, the virtue of the book, the opening up of discussion to a new model that we all know is necessary and needed, and yet we're continually stymied by forces in bringing it about. So I just wanted to thank Jeff, Princeton University Press, which is an amazing partner to independent bookstores, really a model for how publishers could actually, no matter what they say they think they're doing, facilitate new relationships to independent bookstores. And your devotion to bookstores and the future of bookstores is really wonderful, and I appreciate it. Thank you. What we'd like to do is, I think, come up and sit all together and have a discussion briefly for the panelists first, and then for the audience to ask questions, and then for the Zoom audience also to engage with this book. Thank you.
Yeah, that's better.
Not bad?
Yes. And we have to turn
Yes,
ourselves
everybody
on.
on.
There we go. Okay. Are you all on? Thanks for coming out. Thanks for tuning in. We're all really excited to be here with Jeff to celebrate his new book. Congratulations on that. And I can only echo some of what has been said also about the fact that we're sitting in New Jersey's best public library, and what a partner that is, and that everything we do begins and ends with the books themselves, and that means with the publishers. Thank you, Christy. Thank you all friends at Princeton University Press who are in the room. So yes, as Cliff said, we thought we would ask you some questions and each other if we want, but then open it up to everybody. And where I thought maybe we could start is, your book is also very personal. There's a lot of you in there, and a lot of where you come from in relation to the world of books. And one of the effects of that is that you speak about Seminary, which I have to say, the highest compliment that anyone can pay Labyrinth Books is to compare its collections to Seminary Co-op. It's just a fact. So there's a cumulative sense, and you also name it a sanctuary in some ways. So there's a way in which the reader comes away with the notion about your ideal for a bookstore as being sort of a little bit of a temple. And maybe we can talk about that. I think for us, we would at least like to add other idioms in the playground. The labyrinth is in your book, and obviously in our book, we consider the labyrinth a lab also, a laboratory. So, and what are the implications of thinking of our stores in these other ways, along with thinking of them as sanctuaries? But would you tell a little bit more of the story of why for them, for you, they are also in some way holy?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I do want to say to anyone here, not just the library itself, but then also Labyrinth, you're all spoiled. You have amazing book spaces. There are so many communities that would love to have spaces like Labyrinth that don't. And that we're trying to build, as Cliff was saying, a model whereby we could actually deliberately build what we've already inherited that really was not meant ever to support the kind of stores that we have. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community, and that community has a very different relationship to books than I think the secular community is, the people of the book. And for me and for the community I come out of, books are really meant to foster one through life. It is not something that one engages in order to become educated. It is a habit that's built in order to be learned and live a meaningful life. I have personally, because I left the tradition, and it's an Orthodox tradition, have found my sense of the sacred and the divine in the heterodox, not the Orthodox. The Orthodox have one set of books for life and read them with great pleasure, and that's amazing, and I have tremendous respect for it. But it's not my religion. My religion is one of heterodoxy. And so when I browsed the shelves of Labyrinth, and I've been able to do that quite a bit, which has been a privilege, I'm finding new ways of thinking about the world, thinking about myself here. Emerson's quote was fantastic, and that's exactly right. We often go into a bookstore in search of ourselves, or in search of quiet, or contemplation, or community, or any of these things that have traditionally been religious concepts, perhaps. But I think for many of us, our temples, and even if religious or not, our temples and our churches and our sanctuaries and our pilgrims, and we have reverences, all these religious terms, because that's where we find ourselves and where we find meaning.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if you want to chime in and have
And
questions.
also
But-
introduce yourselves for the online audience.
Oh, Dorothea, Labyrinth Books. I've already introduced
Yeah.
myself.
Eric from Classics Books. We have in Trenton, we do about the same thing. We're about half bookstore, and that's where you start, like you said so well. But we're also half clubhouse, I think clubhouse to the point where I have customers late on a Friday night. It'll be midnight, and they're playing Scrabble, and I'll just give them the keys and leave, and the customers then run the clubhouse. So it's always sort of half bookstore, but half these other community functions.
Can I open the book for a second and ask you to talk a little bit more about a passage? And you've introduced us. There's many leitmotifs in your book, and in that sense, it's quite literary. And you just touched on, and some of those are built around binaries, and you just touched on one, which is that between learned and educated. You write, our political economy must make the distinction between worth and value, learned and educated, ethics and morality. And there's a lot packed into that. And I wanted to know if you want to sort of unravel some of those threads for us in order to take us deeper into the book.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that question. And all of those are references to other books. And one of the things that, and I read this passage actually about, I really am trying to use the bookstore itself as an argument on its own behalf. So the book itself is really just a browse. Hopefully, if it's successful, it's just a browse. And some of the books that I pull off the shelf, deal about value and worth. This is something that I'm pulling from Lewis Hyde's The Gift, where it speaks of the difference between commodity, which has value, and then a gift, which is something you can't put a price on, right? These are the priceless things. And what are they? The things that matter most. It's love and suffering, even, but meaning, and all of the things that we think of when we think about what it means to live a meaningful life. life, wisdom. These are the most important things in the world, and yet we can't put a price on them. Ethics and morality is speaking to, Robert Musil writes about this in his essays, like the difference between the thing that happens that is a distinct act that one could discern perhaps a lesson from, as opposed to a way of being in the world, which is really about how things relate to each other, which the gift also, separate from the commodity, is also about circulation. It's good to talk about this in a library, because these are things that cannot be taken off the market, right? Love is not created or destroyed, it just circulates, it can't be pulled out of the market. And in recognizing that so many of our political economy, the political economies that are built upon a notion of commodity, but clearly the idea ultimately is to live a meaningful life, live a life of purpose. And so if that's the case, how can we look at structures that acknowledge the ultimate goal as opposed to certain ways of getting there?
So, I mean, one of the things though is that with those binaries, what happens is you're at an impasse. If you choose one or the other, and it's an impasse. You certainly don't, to quote, I think it's Wild, today we know the price of everything, the value of nothing, right? I mean, so the problem is, if you're governed by price, it dominates and destroys so many other values, right, that are important. But if you made a reversal, you could easily be, of worth. It's the worthy that decide, and you're in Downton Abbey. And that world where things are inaccessible. And I certainly appreciate constantly the articulation of this impasse, which we are certainly at in so many things. But it seems to me that, the best moments are when you march towards something, a new model that always has a third term, right? That doesn't demand that, I have to say, the gift is an exchange. Or I get it's an exchange still. It's not a capitalist exchange. And that the virtue is that it doesn't matter what you're exchanging. It's the fact that you're instituting a social obligation and a relationship. And it would be nice if our exchanges were viewed like we've started to in little ways to say, buy local. It's not about what you buy. It's about the act that transcends the purchase to know what you're doing for a community. Right?
There's a really good example of this. I think that's a great point. And one of the things that the book is talking about, sometimes the book is a commodity. And it is just, I just want to go in and buy a book, and I don't need this whole gift exchange. It's not, I just want a book and walk out. But that we have one coin of the realm for everything that's on the market, when really the difference between a movie tie-in edition of a book and a classic, or between 2 scones and 2 lattes and James Joyce's Ulysses, like that they're the same price. That's one of the issues. But to speak exactly to this point, I had somebody in 57th Street Books, which is our more general interest bookstore. It was 2 people. They were from a real estate company, and they have rentals in the neighborhood. And they hadn't been to a bookstore in a long time. They were walking around with their bags, and they said, "Oh my God, this book looks amazing!" And $30. Well, I know I can get it on Amazon for $25. And but by the way, we're going to be able to rent out these buildings because there's a bookstore in town. But not even thinking about the value that it provides. And this is just on the market. This isn't even a question of the value it provides spiritually or anything. Even just the market, we're not. If we're thinking about it in that way, we're also not evaluating God. Part of it, and you are both the exception. I mean, and we're getting to know each other. And like in thinking about what it means to be a bookseller, so many of us are so humble about the work, and we're not out there talking about the incredible value of the work of bookselling. And a huge part of my mission with the book and what I'm hoping to change with the not-for-profit model is to acknowledge that there's a profession of bookselling that should have remuneration that is similar to any other profession, where there are skills that cannot be found elsewhere. And we just are too busy and I think humble to shout it from the rooftops the way that others do really well.
I wonder if we can stay. I'd love to hear you talk more actually about the model, which isn't that spelled out in the book. Maybe we can get to that. But I wonder if we can stay for a second with the question of devaluing, because everything you say and Amazon's role in this, and we have these same kinds of anecdotes from the work that we do. Although that one's pristine, that one's really a very pure one. So certainly we fight for the worth of the book and struggle with the fact that the price of the book is being driven down by Amazon. At the same time, maybe we can talk, and I would like to hear you on this as well. For us in our work at Labyrinth, a very important ambition is affordability. So because affordability is one avenue to access for broader readership, especially in a downwardly mobile economic moment. And and we have our secret sauces, as Cliff has said, for that. But the used book world is another one like that. And I would love to hear just a little bit more about how you source your books. You just told us about an amazing program that I think people should know about literalizing the gift economy in your own bookstore. And maybe you can speak to that and to access and affordability from your own context and your own experience.
Sure. So used books might be better situated for the affordability argument because, in some ways, if you did a Venn diagram of folks that shop on, say, at Barnes and Nobles and folks that shop on used bookstores, there would be some overlap, but not an awful lot. That is, we find that in the used bookstore where that people have affordability issues or people that are more interested in the browse that, I want to find something, it's more of a treasure hunt. I want to find something that's out of print that I've never thought of before. My parents, much to my dismay, were new bookstore people. They read the New York Times. They wanted to get stuff that was on the list that was available in the moment. And so if I didn't own a used bookstore, they would never go into a used bookstore because that's stuff that's from years ago. So there's being situated for affordability, that's one of the things in that Venn diagram, I think, for the used bookstores. And we have a program a while ago in Trenton. One of the mayors had put together a literacy commission, and they put me on it, which was a little daunting because everybody else were literacy experts and educators. And I said, I just have a bookstore. I don't know what I'm in the world of literacy, but I'm not in the world of literacy. Like, that's not what I do so much. And I said, what do you need me to do? Because I'm better if you give me an assignment and I'll get it done. And they said, well, do what you're doing. Just get more books out to people. I said, well, yeah, let me do that. We have at a used bookstore, people drop off books and we give them store credit. But a lot of times people then don't use the store credit. They're dropping off books because they're moving and from Colorado, they're not really going to get books from me. So I'm starting to accrue. If everybody came in tomorrow to collect all their store credit, I think I have $300,000 on the book. I can clear out the store. But some people just aren't going to use it. So we started asking, listen, if you're not going to use the credit, can the kids in Trenton use the credit? And they could come in and get whatever book they want. And that started, it's been 15, 20 years now of giving free books to kids in Trenton, and it's been wonderful. It's been really great. So it's a way to just conquer any affordability issues. There's a couple other nonprofits that do books that try to do that, but usually it's like a 50% discount. So, but if you're an under-resourced community, you would still have to fundraise for that 50%, the first 50%. So free to the kids has been wonderful and a good way to, people come into my store and they said, there's so many kids here. Like, how are they? I didn't think kids read anymore. I thought they were all on their phones or something. I said, no, well, if you give it to them, they're really happy to read a book. So.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It really is a gift economy in a very pure way in that sense. I'm so happy to know about it.
One of the great untapped secrets is even parents that don't read still want their kids to read, which is just an interesting sociological phenomenon.
Which is a segue to another question I have for you, which is that you are the director of Seminary Bookstores, plural, and 57th Street Books is part of your project. It's less discussed in the book, but I thought it might be nice if you said a little bit more about it. In some ways, if you take 57th Street Books and Seminary Co-op and classics books and throw in course books, you have the mix that we've tried for at Labyrinth, right? Because we buy libraries, we do course books, we have kids books, we have all of this, and we try to build scholarly collections. So I would love to just hear you talk a little bit more about that also wonderful bookstore and how you think of that space and whether you think It's governed by similar, different, the same sorts
Yeah,
of criteria.
absolutely. Thank you for that. I think maybe if it's okay, I'm going to step back a little bit and also speak to the last question and kind of pull it together because it's about the model. And I will say, any used bookseller would have hired me. I would have been a used bookseller. And I love shopping used bookstores. I can't wait to see your store. I'm always in the basement of your store because those are the books I can't find. I just didn't have anyone to hire me. So I ended up in new books, and that's where we are. But I want to, before we even get into the accessibility conversation, part of what I'm acknowledging with in the book, and again, it's a celebration. It's really it's not an argument, but I want to think about all of the work that goes into making books, getting books out there. And the selling of the books is one element of it. Libraries are another element of it. These are all critically important parts of an ecosystem that needs to be supported. And what's happened is because bookstores have inherited this retail model where the difference between the cost and the list price are ostensibly what we make our living off of, we then become the barriers to accessibility per se. And we also build a model that is really made for something that sells quicker, that is much more popular. That's the haberdasher who has to keep something in stock from, everything in stock since 1750. And this is true not just scholarly books, it's all books, even with a good margin, quote unquote good margin, are way less profitable than any number of other things that we could be selling. And so the argument that I do have is actually the current model for the Seminary bookstores, which is a not-for-profit model whose mission is bookselling. And that is founded upon basically there are two truths, right? One is that no reader, most readers don't need a bookstore to buy books in the 21st century, which was not the case once upon a time. And the second is that no new bookstore can make a living on the sale of books alone. And all these secret sauces, why couldn't this sauce not be secret? And it's just that we have books and we're here to sell books. That really is what we're meant to do. And we come up with creative ways to do it. And it's brilliant. It's fun to watch when you're in the industry. But why wouldn't we build a model that actually begins with what we do really well? And the question becomes, what do we do well? It's discovery, it's browsing, it's a space for community, and that's true for art. We have a great children's section, 57th Street Books. It's going to be 40 years old next year, and it has raised generations of readers and writers, and community builders, and educators, and just being in that space is amazing. And actually, the beginning of the community chapter 4, I'm wandering through the bookstore in the morning before customers come in, and lights coming in through in the basement, and that's 57th Street Books, which is just a magical space. So if that's the case, then what are we doing with these stores in our communities? Why do they exist? And how can we, not just as booksellers, but as communities, and really there's an exhortation in the book that we're all booksellers now. We're all here to build these in our spaces because it shouldn't be incumbent upon the four of us to figure out how in our communities to build these stores. But like the literary citizenship that you're doing and that so many of us do, it actually is a public service in so many ways and a complement to the libraries. And how can we maybe finance those sorts of things? And there is a difference though, again, between the commodity of the bestseller that's just selling really quickly. I don't know if you're carrying what is probably a wonderful book, the Dolly Parton James Patterson book, which I'm really excited. Dolly Parton puts her name on anything on there, and James Patterson's a hero in terms of what he's done for booksellers. I don't know if you have it on the shelf, but my guess is if you do, you're selling fewer copies than Target is selling of that book. And that is
Yes.
Yes and yes. And we have it on the shelf and we're selling 3 copies, but we're going to sell, 100 copies of the Jim Harry book that Princeton University Press has published because those are the books that we sell well, and no one's coming to us to sell 100 copies of Dolly Parton Patterson, and yet it's all one industry. Doesn't need to be.
I'm just aware of the time, and so maybe we should open it up to questions both in the room and also on Zoom. We could go on and talk shop until the cows come home.
Good morning. I'm very excited to be here. I just turned 66 years old. I've wondered about books for the last 55 years. The reason is I went to high school in 3 different countries, but the country I left, books had an entirely different meaning than books in the West and North America. So I always, for decades, have wondered about bookstores' existence and books. Let me make it as short as possible. I traveled a lot, and when I traveled in the US, I noticed there are towns that are no bookstores. No bookstores. I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about 20 years ago. And recently, for the last few years, I have volunteered myself to teach inner city children on my own contrary to what Mr. Trenton, Classic Books is saying, when you give a book to an inner city kid in the United States, they don't want to take it. Whereas compared to some of the countries, I just started in some third world countries, if you give a book, they will grab it and they'll read it immediately. This is now. Coming back to my childhood, I remember there was a very famous author called Enid Blyton. And by the time I got an Enid Blyton book from somebody, it has changed like 50 different hands. So books had a different meaning then, and I had always wondered about bookstores' existence. So I think it boils down to primary education, parenthood. I know I've traveled all over, literally all cities in the US, and I know some households never had a book but the Bible. I know that for a fact. I know these families very well. I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So I don't know where I'm driving, but I think I feel a different concept. The concept of books were very different in North America than compared to most of the countries I've visited or lived. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
it makes sense. I'm not
It's
sure.
not a new thing. I'm saying it's not the internet. I think it's
No.
I think
That's
there's more to
very, that's very true. So, I mean, just like in Jeff's book, the devaluation in the West has a history that's coincident with modernity, right? From 16th, 17th century on, all right? The hesitation of what books could be, the democratizing force, they had to be, like ever, had to be licensed, they were prohibited. There are only periods that, there's real free expression, right? And then they're discarded. I mean, you don't have to prohibit them if you just dismiss them, right? So I can't say that history itself tells you that there are other forms of knowledge that have been valorized above that. And certainly, if you look at the enrollments in what's called STEM today versus the declining enrollments in the humanities, you get an interesting impression on what self-justifies itself as a valuable form of knowledge to have in the marketplace, which governs the constitution of most knowledges, right? Books have labored, books in the wide arching category have labored under that. I'm not sure that can change very much. On the other hand, there's always been a minority and very essential part of knowledges that are transmitted through important books that form the backbone of social and cultural values, also in the West. No matter how often they're dismissed, the critiques keep cropping up because what is important is to find ways to live. Princeton publishes, to me, a fascinating series, basically republishing Stoics and Epicureans and ancient philosophy, which is all about how to be, right? What should I do? Before I go to sleep, I should review every action of the day and see how reasonable and unreasonable it was. Why is that important? Why is that so popular now? Obviously, STEM isn't teaching you how to live. We're still looking for transformative moments. So, I agree. It's a long-standing problem, but it always has its acute moments.
Well, thanks so much. I'll get to you. And we have a question from the online audience. I'll be curious to see how you respond. What activities are bookstores offering to the community to make them vital to its residents?
Well,
Take it
I'll
away.
start. So we have multiple community groups that use our space. We have a Scrabble club that's there every Friday that I usually have, if I didn't kick them out, except for those days I let them have the keys to the clubhouse. If I didn't kick them out, they'd stay for breakfast. They'd just be there the entire day. We do a lot of author support, as Labyrinth does as well. We have book signings, and we encourage a writers community. So to have a book on our shelf, we take a commission to pay the rent, but we also require that the authors come back to other people's book signings to sort of build that collective knowledge of how to not just write, but the more distasteful things like to promote and sell your book, that you can talk to other people going through the same thing. We have other community groups. We have a knitting club that's there every other week. We have an open mic that has been, I guess they say they're the longest open mic in Central Jersey, but you know, I'll trust them on that. I don't know for sure. So we open up for the community, and then we do things like free books for Trenton kids. That is, I think, our primary sort of community service.
Yeah, we do versions of these things. We kick people out a lot sooner than you do. But I think there are a lot of similar kinds of engagements. I'll just say that we've had from our inception commitment to social justice causes, and that has led to different projects. The most long-standing one, and one that's extremely important to Cliff and my brother-in-law Peter and me, is a commitment to helping to build libraries in prisons in New Jersey. And so, but we do think of the store not just as a space for literary or philosophical debate, but also for civic discussion and engagement. And the store certainly gets used that way as well.
I am in awe of all of that. And we do similar things. Giving the keys is great. And I know that the whole idea,
Sometimes.
like a sleepover, you know, like we just talked about that. I honor that. We do a lot of that work. There's a movement right now in the bookselling community called Reimagining Bookstores, and it's acknowledging that these models are broken and trying to figure out ways to support them. And they're doing things like author services and thinking about, we actually, one of our biggest booksellers has a travel agency in order to help support literary travel agency in order to support the book sales. And we do a lot of author events, and we do work with not just books in prisons and curating libraries, but also a not-for-profit that is called My Very Own Library that pays full price, because they understand the importance of paying full price in order to get books into the hands of underserved communities in Chicago Public School. That said, what we do is we have a space for books and browsing, and that is the greatest community service we can offer. And when I'm in this group of the Reimagining Bookstores, and they're doing amazing work, and I think it's really important. But every single step away from book selling is a step in the wrong direction for bookstores, because we know how to sell books and build great spaces. I don't know anything about literacy. I don't know anything about author services, and nor should I. I want to work with the people who do. And why can't we actually all, as a community, and I would ask the community itself, say, what do you want from a bookstore? A space for books, isn't that enough? Like, isn't that what we're here to do? And can't we find models and the community-minded support sharing with each other that say that is actually not just enough, but we need more of that? And why is the literacy group not helping to help support the bookstore that is creating a space? And why are the other services and all on and on and on? Because we actually are a great community service and a civic institution as well.
And this book is a manifesto to that effect, and really, really important as such.
And you can buy it at your local bookseller or right here. And also, I just want to suggest that any bookstore, local bookstore, or business helps hold the community together. I know, at least I can speak for Dorothea and Cliff, they're civically engaged in the community and working to make sure that it's the best community because they hold it together. So.
My question was actually very similar because in your first presentation, you talked about reimagining what a book selling could be, different models for book selling. And you've talked about community service here, but are you rethinking the whole model of how to sell books?
Yeah. So again, as a not-for-profit bookstore's mission is book selling, and this is confusing even to me as I say it, but this is the case legally. Our mission is to sell books, but we're not retailers, okay? Meaning we're not making a living off of the difference between cost and list price. And our profession, while we are selling books, is not retail. It is the filtration and selection and assemblage and enthusiasm that I described. Those are the characteristics that could be used to help curate libraries. It could be used to help support building libraries in prisons, which is an incredible thing. It could be used in terms of bringing people together from diverse populations who might all come to a bookstore and they might not ever be in the same room otherwise. So the community space is really important as well. And so what could we ask of our bookstores if we were ambitious as a community and acknowledge that bookstores are not there to sell books? I can get a book online easily and sometimes quicker. My book, by the way, I'm really excited. Amazon is discounting this 11 cents, which is a gift. And not only are they discounting 11 cents, it is actually #1 in the category. right now. You know what category number one is? International finance and law. It's number one. Go look. 11 cents off, and it is number one in international finance and law. There is nothing about international finance and law here, but Amazon will sell you that book for 11 cents cheaper than I will. So there you go. I don't know.
I think, in full disclosure, we've worked, we were asked to come here by Princeton University. And one of our services is to do textbooks, which is overwhelming, thankless, and decreasing all the time. And we knew that when we came. So we were firm believers 20 years ago that books should be part of tuition. I mean, it's foolish not to give students materials everywhere, for like they do in elementary school and high school. But the thing that over 15 years we've worked out is we have taken the profit out of textbooks, and they're discounted to students, and we get paid for the service, a fixed fee for the service. Because whether students buy the books or not, and what Jeff I think is talking about, booksellers produce a service to bring them there, to get them there. And just bringing them and sending them back is not a viable way to run anything. Matter of fact, it's the road to perdition for bookstores. But so part of
We
some.
should just, and in addition, part of this model is that by the same token, since we have taken our profit margin out of the equation, that discount gets passed through to the students. So the university is funding savings to the students in the
As a
same
fixed
moment as they are also helping to sustain an aspect of Labyrinth and thereby the store.
It recirculates a portion of money that would have gone somewhere else to sustain something that serves a community, the students, faculty, and the bookstore.
So how universalizable are any of these things? And Jeff, I don't know, you know,
Okay.
I would say, can we say to young, enterprising, book-loving people, go do what we're doing in this other town and hope that they can do it? I don't know.
Right.
And can you say that there are lots of places, this is a genuine question, can you say that there are lots of places in the US where it's viable to propose that a bookstore turn itself into a non-for-profit?
So my honest answer is, and you know I feel this way, I hope so. And I would rather this be the thing that we try and do for the future. I'm going to give two examples of why I have so much hope. Even though I think it is ambitious and it is completely likely that won't work. The first one is actually, you opened a bookstore in New Haven. Do we think that New Haven has enough readers and faculty who want to have a space like Labyrinth Books? Of course. Should that neighborhood have it? Yeah, of course. Whose responsibility is it to figure out the economic model? Yours. Why? So I would look to the audience, and I would look to anyone who is reading or thinking about these questions and say, it's not for us to answer, it's for all of us to answer. And what do we want in these spaces? We can finance 10,000 things. I worked at Stanford, as you know, and these, like a 25 or 20-year-old would come in with these pitch decks, and you'd get millions of dollars with a pitch deck with an idea. We have spaces that are already, they are the most convincing arguments you can possibly have for the idea of a bookstore like ours. Where's the financing? And I don't mean financing like lend us money so we can make money. I mean, invest in these stores. The Seminary Co-op has been losing money for years, and we have been a charity case if you see it that way. However, our community doesn't see it that way. They see it as an investment. I'll share one other example of why I have hope is that we're sitting in a public library. And could you imagine if a public library didn't exist, and today you went out there and said, hey, why don't we just donate land in every community and then put books on the shelf, and anyone can come and go and take them as they want, and, let's figure out that model. Imagine that happening today and how ridiculous it would seem. Well, this is a pretty modest, idea compared to that, and I think that we absolutely can do it. And frankly, it's late in the day I've been lucky to have a career in bookselling, and I would never have imagined a Seminary Co-op. I wouldn't have imagined Labyrinth Books. What you have built is incredible. But they exist today, and I want them to be here 20 years from now. It's selfish for me. I just want to be shopping in these stores in 20 years.
Gonna give Doja the last question.
I just want to say thank you to all the booksellers up there, and the fact that a bookstore is the most important part of, maybe it is the most important part of the community, along with libraries, I'll say that. Well, as far as I'm concerned, and I've been involved in bookstores and publishing for a long time, but just the fact that Seminary Co-op has been a beacon, as they said, for people, for academic bookstores and for bookstores in general all over the country. And that we're lucky enough to have Labyrinth in Princeton, because there used to be a lot of really good college bookstores, both on campus and off campus. There aren't anymore. I mean, there's a few, Harvard Bookstore, Seminary Co-op, a couple of others, but and even a lot of the ones that used to be great on campuses have gone downhill. So we're very lucky to have them. At the same time, Trenton is lucky to have a bookstore because Trenton's had a tough time economically now for 30 or 40 years, and the fact that somebody has worked hard and kept one open and provided a community service there is fantastic. So I want to thank all of them, as well as other booksellers. But my question is, how do you decide what to put on your tables? Because when you browse, people browse the stacks. Yeah, they go through the stacks, they might pull some stuff out. And, maybe an author they'd heard about for maybe some author they'd never heard of, but it's those tables out front that define a great bookstore. And the Seminary Co-op was, go in and go see the tables in the Seminary Co-op, and the same in Labyrinth, And I haven't been to classics enough to know how their tables are. They may not have that space to do it, but that's where you're really putting out the books that you think are going to interest people. And you got to have a wide array of books to put out there. Now, in a way, because you use used and remainder books at Labyrinth, you're also able to do that for older books as well. So you're able to do the best of both. But anyway, how do you do that? Thank you.
Let me just start, since we're a used bookstore, ours is a little bit different. In the front of the bookstore, I tend to put books that are new to the store that are in the best shape. So people come in and say, oh, I'm at Labyrinth, this is great. And then they find the really well-read ones in the back. And then we find folk, because our demographics slightly different, people drop off books, and so I'll have boxes of books I haven't gotten to right in the front, and I don't put them in the back because people like browsing through those boxes for the hidden treasure they didn't know what they were looking for that's been uncurated so far. But that's something sort of weird about used bookstores. But people like the search as much as I do.
I just want to use this question, for which I thank you, Doja, to say one thing, and I know Cliff and Jeff are going to say a lot of other things that could be said about it, but I want to say something that belongs in this conversation. Our tables are what they are because of the staff and the booksellers that we have. And a good bookstore is its books and its booksellers. And we are every day thankful for the colleagues we have who devote their working lives to this shared project, and it's a shared project. And so the tables are a function and a reflection of that. And there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of collaboration around that. So I'll just use your question to say that much, but I think these two have, there's a lot else that could be said.
Yeah, briefly, I would just like I learned years ago from friends that the best way to sell books is just open the boxes on the floor. That attracts your regular customers to, oh, new, I'll go through that. But I will say, actually, what I've always noticed is a passion for buying. First, a passion for buying, to bring things in, and then making sure that you're constantly renewing what you have, because there are lots of different kinds of customers, right? But mostly, we're doing it for more regular customers and making them come even more often by showing that we get new things in all the time. I mean, someone who comes once a month, it's brand new, whatever you have at that very moment. But I don't think there's a philosophy behind it, but it's putting your best foot forward, whether it's remainders or whether it's used books or something that you think will interest, and also not something, but a number of things, because you can't predict who's going to look at that table.
Interest and surprise, and what was I going to say? I had something else that I wanted to say. Jeff, you answered. I'll come back to it. Yeah.
Because I'm actually going to echo you, Dorothea, and I talked about assemblage as one of the qualities that a bookseller uses, or the work, I should say. And I do want to call it the booksellers as well, because this is a really important part of this, is that things don't happen without paying for them. And our booksellers, so we currently pay starting booksellers $15.25 an hour, because minimum wage is $15 an hour. We pay something on the order of 70% above market rate in this country and for a bookseller role. We currently pay our managers, who have been doing this for a decade and a half, $50,000, which is about 40% above the industry average for booksellers in those roles, independent bookstores. So I just want this community, all communities, to understand when we talk about the work of a bookseller as a retailer, and you are thinking about building these spaces, there is no model to support the work. And we talk a lot, and this is true in libraries, and this is true in publishing. There'll be these conversations about, oh, everyone, and anywhere, nobody gets paid enough. We understand that. We want to put a price on it because it's really important to understand just what we're talking about. There's this idea of vocational law that I actually learned through libraries. I learned it was bad through libraries. I thought it was great when I heard it. Like, I love my job. I have vocational law. I really do. I've been doing this almost 30 years. I feel so lucky to be able to do it. And then there are young librarians who are saying, well, vocational law, whatever, I need to pay my rent, and I have student loans, and I maybe want to buy a car, or maybe want to start a family, and God forbid I could buy a house, right? And those things are not available, and vocational law is not enough. Let's stop talking about vocational law. I hope that we can talk about vocational law again and not use it as an excuse to underpay. And a big part of what the book is trying to do is speak to the qualities that create these incredible community environments, these incredible experiences that we have around discovery and surprise and delight, and say, well, what if we financed an actual profession of booksellers who can do the work that our great booksellers are doing? I mean, what you are doing is incredible and is of tremendous value. How do we create that profession? So that is a big part of what the book is not about. It's obliquely about, and if there's a celebration, it's also to say, if we want to have this in the world, we need to pay for it.
Amen to that, and I remember what I was going to say, which was simply that you describe in the book booksellers as professional enthusiasts.
Yes.
And that is definitely true. I would just add, we're also a really, really opinionated bunch. And the tables are also the result of that contestation, which is another way of saying that we do try to intervene in our cultural and political moment on those tables.
Thank you all so much, Jeff. Thank you for your book, and thank you all for being here. Thank you.